Does fundraising make you cringe? Is it something that you put off on the side of your desk and get to when you have time? Because, you never have time. You may be a reluctant fundraiser. And if you are, stay tuned because we're going to talk to Cindy Wagman today about rewriting or rewiring that mindset that keeps you procrastinating on fundraising and turn into not a reluctant fundraiser, but somebody who actually gets the funding for your organization to serve your mission and purpose and do the work you are meant to do. Cindy Wagman is the president and founder of The Good Partnership, a values-driven, social justice-informed consultancy that is working to unlock the potential of small nonprofits through fundraising. She's a certified fundraiser, and you're going to hear how not only does she use that sort of fundraising expertise, but the training she's taken over the years around neuroscience and how we can rewire our brains to help us go from that icky, reluctant fundraiser to somebody who actually finds fundraising maybe even an enjoyable part or a more meaningful part of the work we do. Let's transition into the show. Welcome to the Surviving to Thriving podcast that helps women leaders in nonprofits get out of survival mode and thrive in both leadership and life. I'm your host, leadership development coach Kathy Archer, and I help women leaders enjoy impactful leadership. Welcome to the podcast, Cindy. I'm super excited to talk about mindsets because I talk about mindsets all the time, but you have a different lens and a different focus as we talk about mindsets today. But before we get into that, let's, hear about you and your journey and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, well, thanks, Kathy. And I'm so excited to be talking to you because I know we share that approach of coaching and leadership. And I so admire what you're doing. Who am I? How did I get here? I think I'm one of the very few people most people in the nonprofit sector would meet who actually made a decision to become a fundraiser. Like that was an active choice I made while I was in university. This was before the big fundraising education programs really existed, or maybe they were in their infancy, but I didn't know that you could be a fundraiser professionally until one summer while I was in university. I met two fundraisers and I thought, that's it. It marries all my passion for the sector with things that I already liked doing. I was sort of volunteer fundraiser in university, raising money for local organizations. So yeah, I made the decision and it was a very conscious one. I wrote a thesis on feminist fundraising.
Some people are raising one eyebrow now going, really?
Yeah. So I've always had a passion for this work. And it's, over the past 20 years that I've been doing it, I can see that most people don't, and especially the people who haven't pursued fundraising as a career. There's so much reluctance around fundraising and discomfort. And I see this as one of those things that we have to get right and has to feel good if we're going to really achieve our missions. And so now I'm on a mission to help reluctant fundraisers change the way they feel about fundraising.
Okay, we're going to talk about reluctant fundraisers in a moment. But tell me how the whole mindset, like where did you start thinking, mindset matters?
Mm-hmm. So it's a combination. One thing that I've always been aware of is in my career, I've never felt that I couldn't. I mean, I've had moments where I was like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? But I always felt like if I put in the work, I could achieve my goals. And I started to, and then I couldn't figure out like, what was the secret to why I was successful in fundraising? I'm reading the same books as everyone else. I'm learning the same things, but, some other organization or person next to me wasn't doing the things and I was. And so as I actually started my business, The Good Partnership and consulting, I started to learn a lot more about what entrepreneurs are doing and their mindsets. And that's when I started to discover the science behind our behaviors And really it clicked for me, like, wait a second, these are the way my brain is wired is towards taking action, which leads to success. And there are a lot of people who have beliefs and feelings and these shortcuts in our brains that really prevent them from raising money. And so this sort of just, I happened upon a couple people in this field and then started to get hooked on it, because I really feel like I think the reason why I love this podcast and what you're doing is because I think you tap into that. And we know a lot of coaches do this work. But for some reason, we've never applied that lens to fundraising.
So the science. So I think partly where people have veered away from this in the past is it's woo-woo, like, oh, you just want me to, like think positive, like that doesn't work, right? But science shows that it does work, and like tons of science. So there's lots there. Come back to, because we're going to dive into the neuroscience. So reluctant fundraisers, this is a term, you're writing a book. Tell us about reluctant fundraisers.
Well, I can't claim to have coined the term, but I haven't heard it used very often. So who knows? But really, these are all the people I see in my work who are executive directors or board members or programming staff, people who in most small organizations, especially, are responsible for fundraising. But really, if given the choice, they would choose anything but. And the example I give is like, if I put a salad and an ice cream in front of me, I can't speak for you, but if I had the choice, I'm picking ice cream. It's the same thing. I know a salad is good. I know it's better for my body and my mind and all of the things, but I love ice cream. And that's what happens with fundraising. And reluctant fundraisers, they're always going to pick the choice, which is usually not fundraising, of the thing that feels better for them in the moment.
So you focus on small nonprofits, which means many of the leaders are doing some fundraising off the side of their desk. So we were talking a minute ago about decision making, right? Like you have to decide. I think we don't often realize that our experience as leaders is based on the decisions we make or don't make. And a lot of those decisions, like you say, are, I'll work on that later. I'll figure it out tomorrow. I'll do it down the road. And I'll focus on, checking my email for the 33rd time today, because that's what we do. But that task keeps getting pushed aside. And you have a strategy for changing that. Is that the plan?
That's the plan. And I mean, the funny thing about those decisions is most of the time we're not even aware we're making a decision.
Yes, exactly.
And so we don't think that we're doing this. This just becomes our reality. And usually it's the excuse, well, I'm really busy. And when you start to unpack those excuses, you can start to see what's behind them, which is, I choose how I spend most of my day. Of course, we don't all choose how we spend most of our time, but for the most part, we make decisions but we're not aware. And so we have to start to understand and build awareness of what's going on with these unconscious decisions that we're making so that we can change them. And the way I describe these unconscious decisions, it's like autopilot, right? So what happens, and we can start to get into some of the science behind it, but our brains have these little neural networks and pathways, and our brains are designed to make decisions quickly and easily. We make tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of decisions every day. And that's too much for us to handle. Even if you think about it, at the end of the day, decision fatigue. I know sometimes with my partner, I'm like, I don't care what we have for dinner, just put something in front of me. And so that's what happens when we make too many decisions. So our brain is designed to make them more easily and with less effort. And it does this by creating these shortcuts, which are formed through repetition. So the first time we experience something, we don't have a shortcut for that. And so we're really hyper aware of all these things and we make a more specific decision. But over time, it just becomes like our way of being, our autopilot.
I think
And
of it like
yeah.
when we first learned to drive, it's
Mhm.
like, like rear view mirror, side mirror, left mirror, forward. Rear view, like we were thinking, I got to do this shoulder check, right? And
Yeah.
those thoughts were in our head like really crazy. And then,
Yes.
yeah, we get to that point where we're like, we don't even think. We hop in the vehicle and we drive, which
Yeah.
is why mistakes are made. But I digress.
Exactly. Well, I actually use the example in the book of driving to work. And the first time you go, you're using your GPS, or like back in the day, it was MapQuest.
Yep.
And you're really aware. And then by the time you're on the job for a month or 2 months, you can, tune out on that drive. You're listening to music or podcast. But then what has happened more than once to me is I'll be going somewhere close to work. So let's say I used to work near the airport. And I'd be going to the airport and I would end up at the office because you're on autopilot, or as someone else has explained, your job is to pick up milk on the way home from work, and you totally just end up in your driveway, not stopped at all.
Exactly.
And that's what happens. That's exactly what it's like. But we don't, again, like we don't think of anything of it. We're not aware that this is happening.
Yeah. So you want to rewrite those pathways in your head so that we're consciously making those decisions about fundraising, right?
Exactly. And in a more we have a very unhealthy relationship with fundraising for the most part. And so I want organizations to be successful. And really, in order to do that, the other example I give is, so much fundraising education is really focused on tactics. It's the how-tos.
Yes.
And we're closed off to that if we don't address the mindset. It's like trying to teach someone an advanced law class if they have no interest in becoming a lawyer. Mm-hmm. It's like you can't teach fundraising if someone has no intention of actually doing the work, because it just makes them feel awful.
Yeah. And so you'll probably get into this in a minute, but I often think it's the thoughts like, this is hard, they don't like me, this feels wrong. And so you're trying to teach them, just send out this email and make them talk, make this appointment. And they're like, I don't like this. It feels icky.
Yeah. I mean, and basically that's exactly it. So what we want people to do is understand and just take a step back and say, okay, what's happening? What's going on? And those shortcuts in our brain are usually, as I said, developed over time and habit, but they're grounded in our beliefs and feelings, right? We have an emotional connection to them. And so we have to start to shift that. And so there's sort of three. The first thing is you have to be aware, and they're narratives, right? These are narratives that are happening in our brains and very often in society. So for example, one thing that came up in a conversation, I think yesterday, was I've worked in a lot of organizations where we think we have to sell things to fundraise. Yeah. And that's based on a belief that inherently people don't want to give to us. So we have to make it a transaction where we think they're getting something in return.
And that belief comes from selling Girl Guide cookies.
Right? No shade to Girl Guides, but I mean,
or chocolate almonds.
Yeah. I mean, very often it comes from things that we see more broadly or we experience over and over again. But there's also so much behind that as well in terms of the value of our work. I mean, I've been in Facebook forums with nonprofit folks, and people will say, how much should an executive director get paid? And a lot of people are saying nothing. We shouldn't be paid for this work, right? Which is ludicrous, but these are feelings and beliefs that exist in society around the value of the work that we do. Yeah. And I actually imagine that most people listening, maybe it's not paid nothing, but I think we can all relate to the feeling of being underpaid, overwork. There's definitely like a martyr type feeling in our sector that we're sacrificing to be able to do this work. Well, if we feel like we're not worthy or valued, then we can't imagine that donors see that value that we can't even see sometimes.
So the first step is awareness. And I just want to highlight, because my listeners have heard me preach this over and over and over again, because it's in my book, Mastering Confidence. So the cycle that I teach is called pause, ponder, pivot, proceed. And pause is like, it helps you access those inner thoughts. And we have to pause. And you said it a minute ago, we are go, go, go. We are busy there's lots going on. And that's the first thing you hear out of any leader's mouth is, I'm so busy. Well, stop being busy and pause. So pause is the first step. Then I say ponder, which is probably what you're going to get into. You got to think things. Pivot is changing your perspective. And then proceed is having the courage to do whatever it is you need to do, right? So listeners, Cindy is telling you to pause. We have to pause.
Yeah, I love that framework. And it very much is aligned with, although much more eloquent than I think we right? So the first thing is to pause and bring awareness. And we do talk about this sort of sequence that happens, or, when you're triggered with a circumstance that usually activates your beliefs and feelings, which means that you're taking certain actions or not taking actions, which of course affects your results. Yeah. And so, but we have to start to bring awareness to those circumstances that create that chain of reactions. Yeah. So yes, pause absolutely is the first step, and start to actually reflect not just on like what's happening, but start to uncover your feelings and beliefs, because that's the emotional connection we have. And unless we replace that emotion, like we have to replace that emotional connection to something else, because we only change when we care about changing.
Absolutely. I preach values as well. You have to understand what the underlying values are. Like if you don't, and a lot of that has to do with the way we were raised, the values we were raised as kids. But the other thing I think there is, it's figuring out where that trigger is, right? Mm-hmm. Like if it's, oh, I'm not worthy, or the trigger is, oh, they're wearing these clothes and that means X, Y, Z, whatever. There's a trigger there.
Exactly. And you mentioned our values. And I think very much we are taught that fundraising goes against a lot of our values because of some of those mental models that we have around who gives money. I've literally sat around tables with volunteers and board members and said, okay, can you think of anyone who you think might give to our organization? And everyone says no. But what's happening is that their mental model is, do I know anyone who can cut us a check for $10,000?
Right.
And that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, do you know anyone who can give $50 or $100 or even $5? Right. But who do you know who cares about our work? And so we have these existing models that align, again, like they don't align to our values. And so we don't do them. And part of the book and part of what I really, because my background is in social justice organizations. Right. That's what I live and breathe. And there's a whole value set around money and power that we have to start to rewrite and understand that fundraising is not necessarily giving up power, and it can be very empowering if you do it in a very different way. So the value piece, I think, is really important.
Yeah. Well, and I just heard two questions that you asked. One is who will give money? The other is who supports our organization? And two very powerful questions. And if I hear who supports our organization, I probably am going to go, this person, that person, this person, this. And then you can say, and how might they support our organization, right? And so you're shifting that's the third P, pause, ponder, pivot. You're shifting your perspective, right? You're starting to go, oh, it's not about money. It's about value. It's about support. It's about how do I give? Who cares about this mission as much as I care about it?
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the big things is then we can start to build a fundraising plan. Then we can start to figure out our fundraising strategy based on that information, instead of what I see happening a lot is looking at the big organizations and trying to copy what they do. Yes. Which again reinforces that this doesn't align with our values, because we're trying to host a big gala event that, maybe is really expensive per plate cost, and that doesn't fit with our community and our values. And so it doesn't feel good. But there are absolutely really powerful ways to have fundraising that aligns with your values. And if you can start with those questions, then you're going to find a fundraising strategy that actually works and feels good for your organization.
Yeah. So walk us through the steps again.
Yeah. So I'm going to use your steps because I like it so much. And it is, so the sequence, I'll give you a couple within these. I'll sort of tie mine into yours because it's so eloquent. So yes, the pause and bring awareness. And then for ponder, there's actually a lot of interesting science as well around how we can change those neuropathways in our brain just by thinking things. It's pretty crazy.
You and I could probably geek out on this in a whole nother podcast.
Exactly. So the first thing is to think about and really visualize the alternate reality. Really start to train your brain to be present in this new universe or new you that is a successful fundraiser and raising money in a way that feels good, and rewriting that sequence that we talked about. And so that comes about. So one is to visualize it. Well, actually, I usually say refute and visualize. So you have to usually write down what those thoughts and beliefs are. And, generally we can actually find evidence around why we're wrong. And if you struggle with that, you can pretend you're talking to your best friend or your, a colleague that you admire. Sometimes we're really bad at giving ourselves advice, but we're really good to other people. So start to actually look for evidence, real evidence to say, is this truth or is this a belief? And then we can start to replace that belief. The first part is just visualizing and thinking and training our brain without being in the actual situation. But then we can start to build habits. And that's really the next piece, is to say, okay, what do I need to do to rewire those shortcuts? And so I would say that's your pivot, and actually practicing a few things, and they don't have to be big. It doesn't mean you're going to sit in front of a donor and ask for a big donation. The two habits that I love, and I think absolutely everyone needs to do, one is meet with your donors. Just listen to them. And I include a whole guide around how to do that in the book. Yeah. Just get to know your donors. And then the second one is stewardship, which is thanking people, saying, expressing gratitude, and engaging them in the work that you're doing. And if you can do those two things a little bit every day, you're going to completely rewire those shortcuts.
It's about being human. We're not asking for money. We're talking to another person.
Yeah. And we forget that. And again, the weird power dynamics. But if you connect with your donors, a few things happen. Lots of really great things happen, but I'll try to touch on a few of them. One is you start to see the commonalities that you have, the connections, the things that you share, because very often we have this othering experience with fundraising where the haves versus the have-nots. Now, part of it is starting to ask everyone who cares, not just about whether or not they have a lot of money in quotes. But then the other thing is, even if you have a donor who you feel like you might not relate to that well, the more you get to know them, you might find that in fact, they could be your biggest champion and most aligned with your organization's mission and values. Yeah. So we start to connect and understand them. It also means that we start to understand more about the people who do care about our work so that we can come up with a fundraising strategy that aligns with our strengths and helps us move forward from where we are. We start to understand who we're communicating with, because organizations do a terrible job of communicating with our donors because we don't know who we're talking to. And we make a lot of assumptions about what they think and feel because we're so uncomfortable even having these conversations. So there's lots of benefits to those meetings. And then same thing with stewardship. Like there's so much value you get in hearing from your donors about why they feel good when they give to you.
Yeah. I want to back it up for a minute, and I want you to try and make sense of this, because I think it's the underlying values. So you and I are both in business. We have to figure out who we're selling to, who we're marketing to, and they call it your customer avatar, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're looking at what are their interests and their likes. I bet I could look at all of my clients and all of my students in my membership site, and I bet 80% of them are dog people.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so that has nothing to do with the work I do. But often it's a conversation I'm having. How's your dog? Oh my God, you have a dog named Zeus? I have a dog named Zeus. What kind of dog do you have? Oh my God, you got to run to the door and let them out all the time. Other people are cat people. And so, you just kind of, these are just different little things. Mm-hmm. But when you get to know somebody on that level, there are, and I can't name them off the top of my head, but there are values associated with being a dog owner.
Yeah. I mean, part of that as well, I think that's interesting as I'm listening to you say that, is the authenticity. Yeah. Because very often, and I will say like same thing, I know, okay, I am a dog lover. I have a dog, but I don't talk about the dog quite as much. But what I do talk a lot about is our commitment to social justice and change. Yes. And so when I look at our clients, they're all organizations that have that commitment. Yes. And we're very explicit. And so often in fundraising, people think they have to hide their values. They have to tone it down. Because they might offend people, but I would say the opposite. Play it up. You are going to find your people the more you wave that flag and say, this is what we stand for. And we're not afraid of that. And we're not ashamed of that. And so again, this is one of those mindset things that comes up over and over as we're taught and we hear, or we believe we're hearing over and over again that, we can't. I worked in that we can't be ourselves. I've worked in organizations where I've been told that certain staff members should not be part of donor meetings because they're not polished enough, which I think is BS. If your donors can't connect with your staff, they should not be your donors. Yes. But I think that leaning into the authenticity and what you stand for, I mean, yes, some people might not be your donors. I know for myself, I've turned down work, money. It's hard, but we do it because at the end of the day, we're nothing if we don't have our values. Yes. Yes. And the more we hide our values, squish our values, put them aside, the ickier we feel. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to feel good and happy and content and confident in the work you're doing, be authentic. Exactly. And you will draw the people to you who are meant to be drawn to you and who believe. I mean, part of fundraising feels like we're selling our soul because it feels like we're trying to contort our mission into something that's appealing to other people. And I don't believe that. I've never met, there are certainly organizations and missions that I personally don't get excited about, but it doesn't mean that other people won't. That's right. Have we missed any points? I mean, we talked about pause. We talked about ponder, pivot. I mean, proceed. Let's talk a little bit about proceed, because I do think that is so important, because here's the thing. While we're talking about neuroscience, it's certainly not rocket science. And what I mean is the advice I give over and over again to people is actually really simple. Mm-hmm. Send an email to a donor and ask for a conversation is not complicated. But it takes courage. Yes, it's still hard. And it's hard because change is hard. And we didn't talk about the patterns to these pathways our brains make, but there are. And one of the patterns is that we like the status quo. We do not like change. Yes. And so it's crazy. Like we like things to stay the same, even if there's very little cost to change. And even if the benefits are to change are very high.
Yes. We take the pattern of least resistance.
Exactly. Even if the other option is so much better.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that proceed piece is really important, because we have to build habits and we have to be consistent and also gracious with ourselves. We know that habits don't, that we always fall off, right? It takes time to establish habits. A lot of people say 21 days. It's actually quite a bit more than that.
It's like a few hundred.
Yeah. And you're not going to be doing all the perfect things all the time, but there's no such thing as perfect. We move forward imperfectly. It's the act of moving forward that's important, and forgiving yourself and continuing to move forward. So I do think that point is so critical, because again, like sometimes it's easy to listen to this or read the book and think, well, it sounds so simple, but I'm not doing it. So what's wrong with me? Yeah. And that's absolutely not true. This is the way our brains are designed.
So I want to go back to the part that you said about envision. I really use analogies and visceral sort of body reactions of people. So often what I'll say to them is, yeah, you're trekking down this path. Like, oh my God, this is hard. This is difficult. It's like, back up in your brain and then go down this path. Right. And so you have to visualize yourself doing the easy thing and backing up and changing the thought pattern.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I love that, because the best way to visualize is to engage your senses. Yeah. Right. It's so one of the things that I practice, and I encourage other people to practice, is some form of journaling where you actually write about the future as if it's happened. Yes, and you
I do that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, but it's important not just to talk about like the surface things, but like, how do I feel? How does my body feel? What do I smell? Yeah. What do I taste? When we start to visualize, we want it to feel true. And the way we experience the world is through our senses. Yeah. So, and analogies give us that opportunity as well to really physically think about things in a different way.
Yeah. I just want to highlight for the people who are in my membership site, the course on Willpower Essentials gives a whole lesson from Gabrielle Odigen on Whoop, which is her method for, going forward and then coming back and overcoming those inner obstacles, because it's the inner obstacles that get in the way of that vision. So you vision all of that, but then, you've got to come back and go, okay, now what? That's great. I'm there, but how do I get through these inner obstacles, not the outer obstacles? Time, they're not returning emails. Those are outer obstacles. It's the inner obstacles that we have to then envision ourselves getting through.
Exactly. And practice that envisioning. It's not a one-time activity. Over and over and over again. And then, as you visualize, and it's almost like you become present as that person. And so go about your behaviors in the day with being that new person. Yeah. And so how would that person be in this situation? What would you do? How would you behave? It really sets you up for starting to change those behaviors that we take. Yeah.
Well, I think we have tons of strategies, and I know there are more in your book coming out. I want to know when your book's coming out and where can people find you?
Mm-hmm. So the book is available for pre-order now. In print, you can find it on October 19th, but I highly encourage you to pre-order because there are great bonuses. You can find it at raiseitbook.com. And if you use the code LEAD, L-E-A-D, you can get 10% off as a special gift to your listeners.
Yay.
And of course, people can find me, thegoodpartnership.com. I also have a podcast, The Small Nonprofit. And I love talking about these things. So come in and join the dialogue with me.
Awesome. And where's the best place for them to find you on social media? Where do you hang out most?
Instagram, I think. I'd say I'm most active on Instagram, but I am not like the best on social media. Yeah. I'm definitely not great on Twitter. Yeah, I'd say I'm on all of them, but
I'll put all the
DM
links
me.
in the
Yeah,
note. Yeah.
DM me if you want to engage meaningfully, because I will say, it's just not one of the things that I've prioritized with my time.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Thank you so much for the change of mindset that we've all got, I think, from today to see things differently, not only in how we fundraise, I think, but just in how we lead in general. And yeah, I look forward to your book coming out, and I hope that listeners head over and listen to your podcast and grab that early bird download so that they can grab that. Thank you very much, Cindy.
Thank you. And thanks to all of your listeners, because I know that this work is very underappreciated and undervalued, and you're all amazing. So thanks.
If you found today's episode helpful, then you are going to love the training library. Many women leaders in nonprofits wish that they had a coach or a mentor to help them, but they don't believe that they or their organization can afford it. Oh, but you can. Inside of the Training Library membership site, you will not only get access to affordable and easily accessible ongoing personal and professional development training, you will also have access to a leadership coach at your fingertips. That way, when you hit those inevitable challenges that leadership will bring your way, you'll have both the resources and the support to navigate your way through them with confidence, composure, and while keeping your integrity intact. To find out more, head to kathyarcher.com/library. If you are enjoying the show, I'd love it if you could leave me a comment or a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Go make the rest of your day awesome.